Made It to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 56. Memories. When Sarah's eyes fluttered open, the headache that hit her full dose was the first to make her wince, and then the realization that she had been drunk the whole night yesterday was the second. Firstly, she took a breather, then rolled over onto her stomach and propped herself up on one hand, while the other pressed against the top of her aching head. Her eyelids were pressed closely together, each twitch a sign of the ravaging headache she was experiencing. This had happened last time, and that alone should have been enough to stop her from doing it again. But it seems it'd have to take more than that, sadly. Now, as a consequence, she'd have to face Damon Callisto. The big, bad and grumpy Damon, to be precise. Perhaps he'll even go as far as ignoring her for the whole day. Hopefully, it doesn't get to that. In the interim, Damon was standing behind the door, well aware of the pain she was currently feeling. Mostly because he too was also feeling the same aftermath of drunkenness. He had done a lot of embarrassing things last night, things that if it were to be disclosed to his subjects, their respect would definitely decline. But something was more important and bothersome than even all his subjects combined. Something that made his arms tense by his side and his mind fill with anticipation. He was anxious, more anxious than he had ever been in his entire life. For what, you ask? Well, for one, he had done something unimaginable. Maybe even imaginable wasn't a good enough fit for what he had done. Terrible, awful, unnerving. How was he supposed to put it into words? He wasn't sure, but he knew that he couldn't take it back. All he could do now was to set things straight. Well, try to at least. The thought of it alone made his mind scream impossible and blasphemous. A king apologizing? And not just any king, an alpha king? He still got chills even from thinking about it. But as consequence, he'd have to face Sarah and drag an apology out of his mouth whether he liked it or not. And so, with both parties terrorized by the thought of merely spotting each other, they went for the door while taking baby steps that was paved with nothing but hesitance and anticipation. Sarah was the bravest of the two, as she was the first to grab the door handle, and with a deep breath she pulled, coming face to face with Damon. Sarah wasn't prepared, not for the hard, long glare she was surely going to receive, nor the explosives he was going to throw her way. But to her surprise, she didn't get to experience such an unfavorable situation. Damon's eyes weren't pinning her down with anger. Instead, it was filled with something that she didn't quite understand. And neither could she understand what the heck was going on when he flinched, literally flinched at the sight of her. "What's wrong?" was her first words to him, and in response he immediately drowned in surprise, his eyes widening. He stood still for a long time, almost as if he was setting his thoughts straight. "What's wrong?" Sarah repeated her question, his feet drawing a step closer to him as she cocked her head to the side in confusion. "I brought you breakfast." He outstretched the tray he was holding towards her and smiled softly, an awkward smile that made him seem weirdly suspicious. "You brought me food? I thought you'd come stalking in with a pitchfork or a whip or something." She carefully took it from his hands and smiled back at him. "You usually get mad whenever I drink. So, you don't remember crawling on the floor or anything, do you?" He took a hesitant look up at her face, then his gaze retreated to her chest for some odd reason. After that move, Sarah could easily tell that something fishy was going on. Really, really fishy. "I crawled on the floor? Seriously? With Katie around?" She face-palmed while shaking her head. "I can't even imagine how stupid I must have looked." "You really don't remember anything," Damon asked again. This time his eyes looked hopeful. Sarah narrowed her gaze. She had definitely done something embarrassingly irreversible. Much like last time, judging by Damon's weird behavior, there was no doubt about it. Did I lick the floor as well? Or something even crazier? Hurry up and tell me so I can prepare to face Katie at least. She rose an expectant brow and Damon stiffened in place, his lips seeming to press harder against each other. Come on, Sarah insisted, following his gaze with her face when he looked away from her. Come on, Damon, it can't be that bad. Sarah? A call came from the side, and Sarah turned in the direction of the voice and spotted Katie slowly approaching. Her fingers were fidgeting with each other, and she was visibly trying to avoid both their gazes, mostly Damon's. If Sarah was seeing right, then they both were acting in the same way. Suspiciously, that is. Could it be that both her and Katie had done something embarrassing in front of Damon? Or did Damon do something embarrassing in their presence? I think I left my necklace in your room, Katie said, stopping around 3 feet away from them. As soon as she said that, Damon flat out turned his face in another direction and ignored her as a whole, a fully charged scowl on his face. But besides anger, Sarah could also tell that Katie had made him somewhat uneasy. Uneasy enough for his eyes to start shifting between hazel and golden. With a brow raised and a mind full of questions, she looked between the two, from Katie to Damon, then from Damon to Katie. And then, within seconds, the bomb came crashing down without so much as a warning. The bomb called memories. Everything suddenly started coming back. Every heart-wrenching memory. What she herself did when she was drunk. What Katie did, and more importantly, what Damon had done. Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 57. Who? Flashback. Crazy night. That was what anyone who witnessed it would call it. To put it simply, there was currently no sane person in the room. Not one. Sarah was creeping on the floor with her hair creepily covering her face, and between her teeth was the lid of an almost empty bottle. She had drank so much that it seemed as if she had mistaken herself for a four-legged dog. Liquor was all over her clothes, soaking the material enough for it to cling to her skin like glue, and her blurry eyes were barely able to see anything around her. One more bottle to go! Katie screamed from the couch she was standing on, swaying from side to side as she tried to gulp down as much liquor as possible. Once empty, she threw the bottle to the side and abruptly jumped off the couch, her feet landing on the floor. She then roamed her blurry gaze around the room, and when she finally spotted exactly what she wanted, she went straight for it. Staggering over to Damon's side, she tapped his shoulder twice with her index finger and stretched her palm out. "Give me the last bottle," she demanded, only for Damon to slap her hand away. He frowned, got up, and stalked off with the liquor held tightly in his hand. If anyone was going to get the last bottle, then it would most definitely be him. Dipshit! Katie scowled, but just when she was about to retreat in disappointment, Sarah came rounding the corner from the kitchen. Nobody had even noticed that she had left the living room. "Guess what I found?" Sarah brightened up in excitement as she bounced on her toes. Katie watched in confusion as she slowly retracted her hand from behind her and brought another untouched bottle of liquor into view. Within seconds, her gaze mirrored Sarah's excited one. "You do know where all the good stuffs are." She went in Sarah's direction and threw an arm over her shoulder, her eyes glued to the bottle in hand. "What do you say we restart the party?" "Hell yeah!" An hour later, Damon finally stepped out of his room. All the liquor had now been absorbed into his system, and now, It was beginning to mess with his head worse than before, even to the extent where his vision reverted to that of humans. He couldn't see things that were at a far distance anymore. If anything, everything around him just got blurrier and blurrier, and the world just seemed to be spinning every time he opened his eyes. At that point, he was no longer the usual sane, impassive Damon. He had lost his sound judgment, and now his brain was barely working, which was why he managed to jumble all his memories together. The past with the present. The face of one replaced with another. Even someone with immense power like him had succumbed to drunkenness, and now he was about to make the worst mistake of his life. Katie was the first to spot him sloppily descending the stairs like an overgrown panda. She slapped her drinking partner on the arm and laughed aloud. "Damon's drunk as hell!" Sarah parted her lips from the bottle and took a look over at him. She nearly fell into a fit of awe when her gaze roamed over his dazed eyes, red face, and cutely wobbling lips. Who would have thought that she'd be able to witness such a fight? The sight of a drunk Alpha King. A laugh bubbled up her throat, and she pressed her palm over her lips in an attempt to stifle her laughter. When Damon frowned, she could only laugh harder. He looked like a kitten now more than ever, a cute little harmless kitten. "You look like a kitten." Sarah repeated the same comment she had made a few days ago, and even though Damon was drunk, his reaction was partly the same. He scrunched up his face and his lips downturned immediately. "I don't look like a freaking kit." He paused. His vision had somehow disappeared for a second, and a deep blurriness took over. He blinked once, twice, then thrice before a part of his vision returned. But unlike before, his gaze had deviated from Sarah's direction and was now pinned on Katie. And it was then that his mind became a complete mess. As soon as his eyes suddenly widened and his body stiffened, Sarah could tell that something was wrong. She could see it. "I missed you." But after those words reached her ears, her worries died in an instant and a full-blown smile brightened up her face. "You were upstairs for only a few minutes," she said, waving him off bashfully. Damon paid absolutely no mind to her reply, but Sarah didn't realize that, though. Her blurry eyes were almost certain that his gaze was directed at her. It was only when he descended the stairs with unusually vulnerable eyes, ignored her very presence, and dropped to his knees before Katie, that she realized that those words were really directed at Katie, not her. "Don't ever leave me." Those soft words came from the lips of Damon. The voice, it was his. Yet the first thing that popped into her head was nothing but words of denial. "He's talking to me, right? If I just take one look at him, then I'll see that his eyes are set on me." Sarah pressed her hand to her chest that had begun heaving up and down at a rapid rate, and then slowly, she moved her eyes away from the spot before her and turned to where Damon and Katie were. The sight she witnessed was beyond her imagination. Damon wasn't looking at her like she hoped. Not at all. Instead, she was staring into the eyes of a surprised Katie, with his palms cupping her rosy cheeks. "Promise me that you'll never leave me again. Promise me!" He continued to plead. But unbeknownst to him, every word felt similar to knives puncturing through Sarah's chest. Sarah's lips felt overly heavy, but she stressed them enough to call his name alone. "Damon?" In response, Damon didn't even turn to look at her. His eyes and mind were solely meant for one person, Katie. Everything else was non-existent, or rather everyone. Reality fully dawned on Sarah within a few seconds afterwards, and then suddenly, drunkenness dissipated from her system. Everything around her became clear, and she stood there, frozen in spot. The urge to claw off her chest was there, but it was a miracle that Sarah was sane enough not to cave in. Her limbs, they were practically tearing apart. Her heart was already drowning in sharp twinges, and her mind was certainly about to explode. The pain bestowed by a rupture in their bond was very close to unbearable on her end. And then, when her glossy eyes zoomed in on him, closing the distance between them, she finally considered the sight unbearable enough to hightail it out of there and up the stairs, where she enclosed herself in the confines of her room. Thinking hard about it all was a must, and crying because of it was definitely a must as well. But getting over it was the only thing she was sure that she wouldn't be doing tonight. Made It to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 58. The Talk. As memories of last night's events returned to Sarah's mind, the tray that she had took from Damon's hand slipped from her grasp and dropped to the floor, landing with a clank against the floor. Words couldn't explain how she felt at present. This wasn't exactly what you'd call cheating, when both her and Katie were considered his mates. And it couldn't be described as betrayal when he obviously wasn't completely in control of his actions. Then what exactly was it? And why on earth did she feel so under the weather because of it? Why did she, for the first time in forever, feel like smashing everything in her path and punching whomever she encountered? And why did her eyes feel like a dam that was soon about to break? As for Damon, he felt as if all of his luck had suddenly run out. He knew for sure that their next conversation wouldn't be pretty, but no matter how much he wanted to avoid it, he'd still get it over with and done today. No later. Sarah? His annoyingly soft voice met her ears. Sarah couldn't help but tear her gaze away from him and look toward the area that Katie had been standing not too long ago. After smashing the tray, she had easily sensed the bad atmosphere and silently fled the scene without a word. Sarah couldn't be any more relieved by her discreetness. So if I didn't remember anything, you weren't planning on telling me? She allowed every bit of sadness in her being to seep into her tone. When she finally spoke, and at the sound of it, Damon's lips slipped apart, his face paling. I was go— He paused for a second to reword his sentence. Well, I would have told you everything. Just not now. Why? It might have been a bit hard to explain, seeing as you would not have remembered clearly that I was drunk and not completely sane. Indeed, there was some form of truth to his words, but without a doubt, Sarah wouldn't feel right with simply brushing this off. She could see past everything else and watch it slide, but for some reason, she couldn't just forget that he had kissed her. No matter how many times she told herself that he wasn't completely at fault. What if every time he gets drunk, he kisses another woman? What would she do then? Of course, that was pushing it a bit too far, but she couldn't help it. To her, this was a grave matter, and the fact that Damon came with a tray of food and a regret-filled face made that quite obvious. You being drunk has nothing to do with this. She looked up at him with surety in her eyes, but she didn't entirely believe what she had just said. What she wanted right now was to be alone, without him around. And getting him angry enough to walk away from their conversation was the best way to do it. If she didn't get out of his sight soon, then her tears would probably leave her eyes in his presence. And she didn't want that. It seemed to me like you were finally letting out everything you were suppressing. I was drunk. That was all it was. Nothing more, he assured. Besides, you're not the only one in shock right now. If that's what you insist on saying, then fine. But I want to be left alone. He ran a hand over his face and looked to the floor, then back at her as if he was trying to keep his cool. but the lines forming on his forehead were clear signs of his frustration. "You're seriously going to avoid me because of something like this?" "I just want some time by myself. Must I always be around you?" She folded her arms over her chest and lifted her chin. Damon was sure that was just her trying to be intimidating. But on the contrary, she was simply trying to keep her tears secured behind her eyelids. "Is there a reason not to?" He frowned. She drew back at his words. Maybe she had got it wrong when she thought he was aware of the gravity of this matter as much as she was. The way he was acting made it seem as if he thought what he had done was trivial. "Are you going to leave or not?" "This is my room." She nodded sullenly, dropping her head and moving to walk past him in haste. But before she could, Damon's arm had stretched across her path, his palm pressing against the wall firmly. She looked up at him slowly. A drop of tear was right at the brink of falling down her face, and all she could do now was hope that she was able to keep it in check until she was no longer in his sight. "Just forget this ever happened," he sighed. "After I invade Maxim's hideout and eradicate them all, I'll kick her out completely. You don't need to be bothered by her, and keep in mind that this is your fault as much as mine. You're the one who told me to drink." "I didn't tell you to kiss her." He went silent for a few seconds, his jaw ticking every once in a while and his fist clenched at his sides. "I was drunk." He gritted his teeth when he spoke, and by then, Sarah could clearly hear the annoyance in his tone. "Drunk Sarah. That's it." "I get that I might have messed up, but that was hardly me talking. And even if I wanted her back, that wouldn't be possible because I already have a second mate." Those words struck like a bolt of lightning and caused Sarah to stiffen in place. If he wanted her back, did that mean that he actually thought of it? She was the obstacle here and not Katie? Sarah's heart began to beat faster than ever, and those stabs of pain that shot through her chest last night returned at full force. She swallowed the lump in her throat and shifted her gaze to the floor. "I see." Damon, on the other hand, was seething. Well, pretty close to it. He had tried his best to stay cool so things wouldn't escalate, but he just couldn't understand her actions. He might have done something wrong, but he did come with the intention of apologizing, right? Yet the way she worded her words made that apology start to fade from his tongue. Before things could worsen any further, he ran a hand over his face, took a deep breath, and opened his mouth to finally squeeze out an apology. But the unexpected look he found on her face stopped him from proceeding. "Sarah?" He dropped his hand from the wall and moved to grasp her arm, but Sarah quickly jerked away from his touch without so much as looking at him in the eyes. "That's not what I meant." He was quick to fix his words. "No, I get it." She licked her lips. "You were drunk and you happened to kiss her. I get it, so now it's settled. Are you hungry? I'm going to get a—" "I'm not talking about that." He swiftly grabbed her wrist before she could react and pulled her over to him. She twisted, wriggled, and tugged her arm, but Damon didn't release his hold on her. He could already tell just by looking at her that if he did, she probably wouldn't give him the chance to speak to her again for a pretty long while. "I said that's not what I meant, so get rid of whatever is going on in your head." She continued to fight against his hold despite his words, but didn't make any move to reply, and neither did she spare him a glance. "Sarah!" She still didn't look at him. "Look at me." She still didn't look. "Sarah, look at me." His voice was slowly taking on a warning tone the longer she failed to respond. Her behavior was obviously making him agitated, and as a result, after a few more unresponsive seconds, he took it upon himself to grab hold of her chin with his fingers. Sarah did her best to resist, but Damon used as much strength as needed to angle her chin so that she was staring up at him. He took a long look over her face. His eyes passed over her pale cheeks and puffy cheeks, then pinned itself onto the streaks of tears that was trickling down her skin. To say he was taken aback would be an understatement. This time, he was the one to stiffen in place, because for some reason, that crystal-clear liquid tugged at his heartstrings so hard that even his fingers loosened around her. And then, amidst his daze, she managed to slip between his fingers. She speed-walked down the hall and to the guest room at the very end, slamming the door shut when she stepped in. A few moments of silence was what it took for Damon to finally recover. He curled his fingers by his side and turned his head to stare down at the now empty hallway. If he wasn't sure of anything, then he was sure that he was practically right back where he started. Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 59. Out of the Shell. Damon's head was filled with hope as he ascended the stairs that led to the guest room. It had been 3 days now that Sarah had locked herself in there. The only times he got to see her were the rare moments when she stuffed her head out the door to collect the food he placed beside of it. Other than that, she made sure to stay clear of him. Damon was frustrated, to say the least, but even though he couldn't help but feel such an emotion, he was beginning to believe that he wasn't worthy of it. If he thought about it thoroughly, then he was certainly the one at fault. He had kissed someone he shouldn't have, and he had said a few things that he shouldn't have. Surely, if he had kept his emotions in check when they had that talk, things wouldn't have become this bad. Yes, she would have probably ignored him the same, but not for this long at least. He couldn't take it anymore. What he needed was a solution, a good solution. The first thing that popped into his head was to throw Katie out and allow her to fall in the hands of the rogues. And he could do exactly that, but he chose not to. Not because he didn't want to, but because it wouldn't change a thing. What he had done would still remain. And next up was an apology that he could surely do, but he didn't know how. No matter how much he called out to her, she wouldn't open the door, not for him and not even for Katie. As such, he had nothing left to do. The severity of this matter was getting to him. There was never a time in his life where he had ever been ignored. Nobody had the guts to do it. But now that it was happening, he was 100% sure that he didn't like it. He despised it. The lack of attention, the guilt that gobbled him whole, the loneliness that plagued him. He hated it. This was not the life of an alpha king. He was sure of it. And today would be the day that he ends this long episode of her ignoring him. He'd get her to speak to him one way or another, even if he had to break down the door or worse. Damon cracked his neck and sped up his feet as he continued to walk up the stairs. He was now determined to have her speak to him, and nobody could stop him. Well, nobody except Jason. While he was in the middle of his mission, someone had the audacity to grab his arm. That someone was none other than Jason. If it wasn't for Damon's impending absence today, then he wouldn't have requested for him to be there. He was a bad influence, more so than Katie. But today was the day for his battle with the rogues, and the only person he trusted enough to leave here was Jason. A few days ago, he had sent out a few wolves to check the credibility of Katie's words, and surprisingly, rogues were spotted exactly where they were directed. Before they changed their hideout, he needed to make a move, and fast. which was why he wanted to get this maid problem over with before he left. This battle wouldn't be an easy one, he was sure of it. There were more than 200 rogues lurking in the area, scattered amidst the trees in small cottages hidden deep in the forest. Damon was confident in his power, but what he was worried about were the others. There'd be a lot of causalities on his side if anything goes wrong, and his head was bursting even when he thought of it. So getting rid of this problem between the two of them would definitely lessen the weight on his chest. "Where are you going?" Jason finally asked, a grin on his face as he held Damon in place. "Don't touch me." Damon ripped his arm away from his hold and resumed stomping his way up the stairs. His bad mood had now become worse because of the dimwit he brought into his house. "Are you agitated because Sarah won't talk to you?" Jason followed close beside him, trying but failing to keep up with his pace. "I feel you, man." Rolling his eyes, Damon stopped to high-five Jason's face before shoving him back. "When have you ever seen me agitated?" He returned to him. "I am perfectly fine. Have you forgotten who I am? Something like this can't faze me." "Then where might you be going with those hope-filled eyes? You seem pretty fazed to me. It's funny to even look at you." He laughed. "Don't irritate me, Jason. My fingers are itching to kill someone." He held his hands up in surrender. "Fine, but how do you plan on fixing the situation? Sarah's pretty fed up with you, if you ask me. You need my help?" "I can deal with this on my own. Stay out of my business." Clicking his tongue, Damon gave him a warning look, then twisted around and carried on his way. "If you follow me, I'll break your limbs." When he was heading towards the room, the determination was all there. Even the adrenaline was there. But when he stopped in front of the door, all of that seemed to dissipate. Kick down the door? That was nothing more than talk. He raised his hands, but they never touched the knob. They never even moved close to it. He feared that even if he managed to hold a serious conversation with her, she'd be even more annoyed at him, and eventually, he'd only end up lengthening their argument. Running a hand over his face, Damon took a worried glance over at Jason, a glance that pleaded for assistance. At that, Jason grinned and didn't waste any time in waving him over. "Do you even know what to say to her?" His grin widened when Damon shook his head. "You just need to get your words in check and you're good. But you better return the favor later." Sarah was curled up on the bed. The plate she had eaten out of until now was laid out in front of her, and next to that was the last pair of clothes she had left in this room. 3 days ago, she made the move to fetch her clothes from Damon's room, and thankfully, he hadn't caught her in the act. But this time around, she wasn't sure if she'd have the same luck. "Sarah!" She stiffened at the call behind the door. It wasn't Damon, and it wasn't Katie either. She was thankful for that, but she still hated the thought of having Jason see her. Her pale skin and baggy eyes made her look like a corpse. But even so, she felt worse than she looked. She had barely eaten or slept these past few days, and it was taking a toll on her body. Truthfully, she was tired of this. She didn't see the use of it all. She was successfully ignoring him, but she wasn't even sure if he even acknowledged that he had done something wrong. That's how Damon is. Sighing, she finally answered Jason's call. "What is it?" "I heard you and Damon were playing hide-and-seek." She went silent for a while, her hands twisting around in her lap. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Then how about we go for a walk? Just to cool your head." Sarah thought about it for a second. She didn't want to meet Damon, but she did want to get out of this room, even for a single second. The same sight every minute of the day made her feel suffocated. It wouldn't hurt to take a walk, right? Where's Damon? Is he gone? He went out a few minutes ago. Jason looked at a frowning Damon when he said those words and stifled a laugh. The room went silent for a few seconds before Sarah finally got up to open the door. She wasn't sure about going out, but she really wanted to. And the fact that Damon wasn't home made it more tempting. The only thing she was scared of is him getting home before she came back from her walk with Jason. But she'd have to think of that when the time comes. Right now, she'd just focus on finally taking a breather. With a deep breath, she twisted the knob and opened the door. Strangely, though, there wasn't anyone around. Jason? She peeped out through the half-open door in confusion as she called for him. A few seconds passed and Sarah finally took a shaky step outside the room. First, she looked before her for any sign of him, and then she slowly moved the door so she could check in that direction. But just as she did so, hands wrapped around her waist and swiftly pulled her into a hard chest. The person who held her was not hard to identify even without clearly seeing his face, because the tingles that spread over her skin already pinned a face to the body pressed against her. Damon. Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 60. Time for War. Mindlink. When a werewolf communicates with another pack member using something like telepathy. Damon? Sarah was as still as a rock in his arms. If anyone said they saw her move or even breathe for that matter, then they'd be lying. The air in her lungs was gone as soon as tingles erupted along her skin. But for some reason, they were more explosive, more delectable than ever. Maybe it was because they had been away from each other for so long, or perhaps she was just being delusional like always. Whichever it was, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that she needed to get away from him. No matter how nice the tingles felt, she couldn't deny that her skin itched when he touched her, not in a good way, as if they were doing something wrong, something that shouldn't be done in secrecy. The reason for that must be because Katie was somewhere around, close enough to be able to witness them both in this position. Katie was the one he apparently wanted, so Sarah uncontrollably felt that her being touched this way by him wasn't right. "Let me go!" she screamed, writhing and twisting in his arms like a child afraid of punishment. She was so determined to get out of his hold that even Damon figured it out judging by the power in her movements. But that only made him tighten his hold. "Let me go, Damon!" He cringed at the screech in her voice, but grinned nonetheless. "You finally left that shabby room, huh? Because you... It was Jason's idea." He quickly corrected her as one of his hands moved from her waist to run through her black hair softly. 3 days is enough time, right? I'm sure you got lonely in that room alone. She shook her head the second he asked that question. Not once did she lift her gaze to glance at him. "I felt more content here than when I was in yours. So now let me go!" "That I can't do. You're mine. I can touch you, talk to you, and look at you whenever I want." His hand that was playing with her hair moved down to her chin and angled her face so she was staring in his direction. But even after that, Sarah was still determined to keep her gaze set on the floor, no matter how he positioned her head. "Look at me, or we'll be standing here up until you do. Stop being so defiant, Sarah. I just want to talk." Sarah sucked on her cheeks as her body reluctantly went lax in his arms and her eyes finally rose to meet his. "I don't want to hear anything you have to say." Her voice went down to a whisper. "If you want to talk to someone, you can talk to Katie." At that, his hands clenched against her, and then sullen words fell from his lips. "Only you humans have the ability to keep grudges for so long." He sighed. "Look, I'm sorry He paused to squeeze his eyes closed and twist his face in a way that made it seem as if he was remembering something horrible. "I'm sorry I kissed her, and I'm sorry for saying something stupid. I promise that was not what I meant. I was just angry because you were angry, if that even makes sense." Sarah was shook by his words. She had never seen or heard an apology leave his lips so smoothly before. He didn't even seem too traumatized after having said something so unkingly. And there was even this sincere look in his eyes that made her almost certain that his apology was genuine. What she wasn't sure about, though, was if he really didn't mean to say what he did. "How do I know that for sure? You looked pretty into it when you were kissing her." Her voice cracked when she mentioned their kiss, but despite knowing that Damon must have heard it, she gulped and carried on, all the while ignoring the urge to release a few drops of tears from her eyes. "And then the next day you say something that would give anyone the same idea I got. What else do you expect me to think?" "I don't partake in silly things such as lying," was his unconvincing reply. She nodded in silent disappointment and moved her hands that were crushing between their chests to her side. He didn't make any move to continue, so Sarah could easily tell that he had nothing more left to say. He probably didn't even know how ineffective his words were. "Will you let me go now? Or do you plan on holding me hostage forever?" Damon's broad, rare smile painted his lips, and he slid in his hand across her face, tucking her hair behind her ears. "The tingles are as pleasing as always," he remarked. Sarah saw his nostrils twitch before he brought his nose closer to her, nuzzling it into the soft hair that capped her head. "And your scent is stronger than before for some reason. I could probably smell you from miles and miles away. This distance you created isn't good for us, Sarah." He pulled her impossibly closer to him, and as her chin pressed harder against his chest, her head pushed back enough for her to stare straight up at him. The action made her aware of the deadly fact that his gaze was shifting between her eyes and lips. Normally, it'd be instinct for embarrassment to overtake her, and then she'd either twiddle her fingers, stiffen, or both. But this time, Sarah did nothing more than drop her eyes to his chin, though the task of keeping it there and not on his two luscious lips was a different story. "Do you still feel tingles when you touch her?" Sarah asked out of the blue, thankfully managing to keep her gaze away from his lips. The question was more like a diversion from his ensnaring glances that made goosebumps rise all over her skin. But it was when Damon clenched his jaw in irritation that she truly realized what she had just said. Without a doubt, blood rose to her cheeks and she began to shuffle in his hold, mostly from embarrassment. "I meant—" "No, she's not my mate. You are," Damon answered simply, his large hand gripping her firmly. "Don't talk about her. I came to talk about us," he told her bluntly. Once again, his gaze shamelessly shifted from her eyes to her lips and then back. Sarah chose to ignore it for the second time. However, he suddenly hit her with another arrow, one that she couldn't ignore. This time, it wasn't his glances, it was his words. "Can I kiss you?" What? She pushed herself away from him the best she could, but he only pulled her back in place. "Stop doing that. Doing what? Touching me? I already told you that I can do whatever I want with you, he declared. I could kiss you, but I'm playing nice since this is supposed to be an apology. This is barely an apology, she frowned. Just kiss the dude. I'm not used to seeing his sorry-ass face. A frustrated voice boomed from the side. Sarah craned her neck to see Jason comfortably sitting on the stairs as he shamelessly picked at his nose with his finger. Both his presence and his unnecessary loudness made Sarah fill with embarrassment, but Jason didn't stop there and continued to ramble on. He never apologizes to anyone. I can assert to that. Isn't that enough of a reason to forgive him? And he's leaving anyway, so just give him a good luck smooch and make up. Who knows? He might not even come back. If that happens, you'll only regret. He continued to rant on and on, but Sarah tuned him out completely as soon as he mentioned Damon leaving and not returning from wherever. He spun her head back in his direction with confusion swarming her eyes. By the way Jason phrased his words, she could only stupidly gather that Damon would leave if she didn't make up with him. That thought seeped dread into her very soul. You're leaving? To where? With whom? It's not what you think, he answered immediately. His eyes gave Jason a hard glare before returning to her. I'm going out for battle. The rogues' hideout has been spotted far into the forest. I need to get rid of them before they cause any more problems. You're going alone? What about Jason? Worry laced her words. My thoughts exactly. Jason grumbled from the same spot, though nobody paid him much attention. Jason will stay here with you in case anything happens, but I won't be alone. I have hundreds of wolves at my command. I just have to kill a few rogues, and that's it. They barely have numbers. But still, are you worried? He suddenly intercepted. She immediately clamped her mouth shut. You are, he grinned. No, I'm just asking. Because you're worried. She quickly shook her head. Because I am the Alpha King. Mere rogues aren't capable of killing me, he assured. Now, if we're done talking about that. His grin widened across his lips. Can I get my kiss now? Aren't you scared I'll die Alpha! A mind link from his subordinate Gilbert came popping up into his head, cutting his words short. I've lost all contact with Darren. I'm sure something happened back at the hideout. What should we do? Damon's body pulled to a complete stop and his grin fell from his lips. Get the others ready for departure, he replied to Gilbert, then turned to Jason. Don't let her out of your sight, and she isn't supposed to step a foot outside. If anything happens to her while I'm gone, you're dead. Huh? It's already starting? Jason enthusiastically jumped up from the stairs and made his way over to them. If there's even a stench on her body, I'll willingly let you have my head. He grinned. I'm serious, Damon warned. And you think I'm not? What's going on? Sarah's confused voice broke their conversation. What's starting? Jason sighed. You should have gotten chummy with him sooner, 'cause he's about to walk into his grave. A hard slap to the back of his head made him swallow the rest of his sentence. I have to leave now, Damon finally said. With a quick peck to her forehead, he unwrapped his arms from her waist and gently shoved her in Jason's direction. Take care of her. This won't take long. He ruffled her hair and then moved to step off in the other direction. But before he could reach far, Sarah quickly grabbed the end of his sleeve with hesitant fingers whilst looking down at his feet rather than his face. Come back safe. A low mumble came from her pink lips. Damon smiled softly. I've never lost a battle. And, without any further words, he pulled his arm away from her and jogged towards the stairs. Then, within a few seconds, he was out the door and into the woods. Made It to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 61. The Trap. "Sit down, Sarah," Jason said for the umpteenth time in 2 hours. He had been on his feet since Damon left, and not once did he have a chance to stay seated. His task was to keep sight of Sarah at all times, and since Sarah was galloping around the room for God knows what, he too had to do the same as well. By now, he wasn't sure if he could keep up with her. Damon is the Alpha King, for God's sake. A few lousy rogues can't kill him. Being the Alpha King doesn't make him invincible, she argued. Her mind was filled with worries of what could be happening wherever Damon was, and as a result, she couldn't stop herself from thinking too hard. What if something happens to him? You were the one who was avoiding him. He probably doesn't even have the will to live. Jason's overdramatic words filled her ears, and she glared hard at him, but didn't comment on it. He was standing by kitchen entrance while she was by the counter. Can't you relax now? I doubt he has even reached their hideout yet. Is it that far? Yes, so why don't we just take a seat and chill? Jason was close to pleading now. She shook her head. You can go ahead. I can't take my eyes off you, even for a second. Damon's orders. Why do you think I've been following you around all evening? She rolled her eyes, but reluctantly leaned off the fridge and made her way to the living room. Jason draped an arm over her shoulder when she was passing by him and grinned. You wanted to kiss him, didn't you? He suddenly said. What? She quickly shoved his arm off her shoulder and headed over to the couch ahead, taking a seat on one corner. You did! His grin widened, and he gave her a knowing look as he plopped down opposite to her. No, I did not. How did you even get to that? I know all. Jason suddenly paused, speaking, and frowned deeply. At first, Sarah wasn't sure of the cause of his sudden bad mood, but she instantly got the message when she saw Katie rounding the corner from the front door. She was pretty sure that they didn't like each other. Not one bit. But while Katie kept her dislike under wraps, Jason chose to show his up front. He obviously has absolutely no care in the world. Every time he sees her, he either glares at her or coldly ignores her whenever she speaks to him. Right now, Katie was trying hard not to show that she's bothered by him, but Sarah could see it in her eyes. And though Sarah couldn't say she was entirely smitten by her at this point, she still felt somewhat sorry for her. Where did you go? Sarah was the first of the three to speak. Surprisingly, after what happened that night, their conversations weren't always as awkward as Sarah thought it'd be. They still talked pretty decently with each other, though it was mostly forced on both ends. Sarah didn't have any problem with her overall aside from when it concerned Damon. She wasn't as bitchy as she was back when she first arrived, probably because she decided to give up on Damon. Though Sarah was no longer convinced of that now that he had kissed her. I went to repair this. She reached into her top and brought her necklace into view. It broke a few days ago. Oh. Sarah nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. Well, are you heading downstairs or will you chill with us? Katie stood still for a few pondering spent seconds before she agreed. I guess I'll stay then. She gave a smile that lasted for no more than a second, then she grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. I'll get you guys some drinks. She dropped the remote beside Sarah, then scurried into the kitchen. Can't you at least hide the fact that you hate her? Sarah grumbled as soon as she was out of sight. No can do. That snake doesn't deserve respect. She sighed. She did you guys dirty, but at least she doesn't have an evil intent now. Who knows? She's probably a changed woman. I'm telling you, that woman can't change. She will always be a snake. You won't know until you get to know her. And stop mentioning stuff about snakes. It's An irritated voice cut her words short. I don't mind his behavior. After having heard almost all that they had said, Katie came walking out of the kitchen with downcasted eyes and stopped once she was a few steps into the living room. He doesn't like me, and I don't like him. Let's end it at that. I don't need you to try and patch things up. She finally rose her eyes to meet Sarah's, and as a result, Sarah could see just how perplexed her expression was. We're not even close enough for you to spare me your pity. You're too kind for your own good. It's annoying. The room went dead silent at that, and this time around, Jason was the one who chose to break it. You can say whatever you want to whomever you want. Jason started impassively, drawing everyone's attention in his direction. The grim expression on his face had Sarah dreading his next words. But you should at least know who to respect as well. Watching both your words and your tone when you're talking to her. She isn't just a simple human. She is Damon's mate and your Luna, even if you've lost your wolf. After those words left his lips, the air became more gloomier and darker than ever. Sarah could hardly even sit still because of it. Sitting up straighter, she cleared her throat. Okay, I get it, she mumbled to Katie. Is that for us, or... She quickly tried to change the conversation as she pointed towards the 3 orange juices cluttered up in her hands. A few moments passed before Katie looked down at it and nodded slowly. Yeah, catch! She threw one bottle in Sarah's direction, which she barely managed to catch, and another in Jason's direction. He, on the other hand, didn't even bother to attempt catching it. He continued to glare at her even when the bottle hit against his chest and bounced to the floor. Rolling her eyes, Katie took a seat next to Sarah and transfixed her full attention on the TV rather than a scowling Jason. Sarah looked between the two and facepalmed. Jason! She whisper-yelled. He looked over at her with risen eyebrows after the 5th call of his name, despite having heard her the first time. Ignoring his childish behavior, she gestured to the bottle on the floor with her eyes, silently telling him to pick it up. Jason was firmly set on resisting her, but the sharp glare he received from Sarah's end urged him to reluctantly do as requested. He indignantly swept the bottle off the floor, twisted the cap and gulped down every bit of it in one go before swiping the back of his hand across his lips. Happy now? Very. Now, what do you guys want to watch? Action? Fantasy? She arched her brow suggestively as she twisted the cap on her own juice. Or horror? Sarah threw the half-filled bottle of juice to the side and sighed. Oh, that was stupid, she commented, frowning as she stared at the movie credits displayed on the screen. Want to watch something else? She switched her gaze over to Jason, only to see that he was fast asleep. I thought he said he couldn't take his eyes off me for a second. Now he's here sleeping like a baby. Frowning, she turned to Katie. Another fantasy? Or maybe horror this time? Katie waved her off uninterestingly as she stared at Jason's sleeping form. Yeah, whatever. For some reason, Sarah noticed that she kept stealing glances at Jason every now and then. She was probably dying for him to fall asleep so she could be released from the deadly glare he had been giving her. While she occasionally glanced at him, Jason had been boring holes into her throughout the whole movie. If you asked her, he was just as unforgiving and ruthless as Damon. No wonder they were friends. You want to choose, or should I? It's better if you choose. Nodding, Sarah got up from her seat and walked over to the shelf, shuffling through the dozens of movies residing there. It was pretty weird to see those kinds of stuff in Damon's house of all places. Who'd think that the Alpha King watched movies? Certainly not her. There's one called The Hunt, she announced, slipping it into her grasp. She took a keen look on both the back and front before holding it up over her shoulder, while the other hand continued to rummage in search of another. "What do you think? Yay or nay?" A few seconds passed and no reply came in her direction. Furrowing her brow, Sarah spun around. "Yay or what are you doing?" She watched in horror as Katie loomed over Jason on the couch and slapped his cheeks again and again. "Are you trying to make him hate you more than he already does? Why the hell are you waking him up?" "I'm not even trying to wake him." Katie moved away from him and walked around the couch so she was standing in front of Sarah. Before Sarah could ask any more questions, she spoke again. "I'm checking to see if it worked. I wasn't sure if it'd work on werewolves as well." Confusion. That was all that Sarah felt. She didn't understand a word that Katie was saying, yet she felt somewhat strange inside despite that, as if something was about to happen, something that she never would have expected. If what worked? She swallowed her saliva and laughed awkwardly. "You're making it seem as if you drugged him or something." "I did." Those words came almost immediately, and with so much austerity that Sarah could feel her whole body pale as blood drained from her skin. "What?" "I didn't give up, Sarah," she said in a dark, low voice as she began to walk dreadfully slow across the living room and over to the small vase that sat below the window. "Not on having Damon, and not on getting rid of you." She clasped a hand around it, and in an instant, her head snapped in Sarah's direction. "It's time to set this plan into motion." Sarah flinched in her spot. Her frightened blue eyes first looked at Katie, then down at the vase, and then towards Jason, who hadn't even moved an inch in the past few minutes. She wanted to believe that this was a prank, something that was only meant to scare her. But even an idiot like her could tell that Katie was dead serious. The look on her face and the way her hands clenched around the vase was proof of her ill intents. And with her standing like a statue in place, the outcome of this was obvious. She'd definitely get hurt. Running was an option, but even that seemed impossible, since there was nowhere to go when the enemy was blocking the exit. The only option she had was to get the hell out of here and lock herself in one of the rooms until either Jason gets the hell up or Damon arrives. But sadly, even that became impossible when she was spun around. A wave of dizziness overtook her, and she could do nothing but still in place. Her face twisted, and slowly, one of her hands went upwards and rested against her aching head. The juice. It didn't take much long to figure out. "I see it's finally starting to work. Looks like I won't need to smash her head in." A loud cackle followed Katie's words. Sarah could feel the dizziness worsen the longer she staggered in place, yet she could do nothing but succumb to it. This was her doom. This was her end. But despite knowing that, all she could think of was Damon. If Katie was plotting against them, then the battle he was so sure he was going to win would definitely be a trap. He was undoubtedly in as much danger as she was.